Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and I work with a lot of individuals with attachment wounds. Today, I wanted to go over a different topic that I do feel like a lot of people are curious about, and I feel like it would be helpful. Today, I wanted to go over the childhood of the anxious, preoccupied attachment style. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is because a lot of individuals, I think individuals who are anxiously attached, their childhood is a little bit less predictable to what other attachment styles kind of had. Fearful avoidant individuals, they tend to have a more volatile childhood. Their parents may have personality disorders. And it's usually a very difficult home where the individual, the child themselves, they feel very isolated and alone and helpless. So they develop a lot of traits where they pull away, but they also become very anxious because of the fear of uncertainty, right? Individuals who are avoidantly attached, dismissive avoidant, they tend to experience a lot of neglect, emotional neglect. And sometimes more severe cases. I'm not saying there are severe cases of all individuals. Like, it can come across in many different ways. But often their emotional needs are neglected, and the only way that they can receive love is if they withdraw, and then their parent usually praises them for being that way and encourages them. So in their mind, they associate love with detachment. So that brings us to the childhood of anxious preoccupied attachment. Let's talk about what happened in their childhood. Now, I'm going to share that, unfortunately, and this is very unfortunate, this can happen even towards infants. Sometimes it can even happen while the mother is carrying, where the child can actually feel some of the stress of the mother because, if the mother is having a high level of stress, the baby can sometimes feel it. That can happen sometimes, and that's with all attachment styles. But what happens with the anxious attachment style, and this is not always the case, but it is something I want to share, is that caregivers tend to only give in when the child is having an emotional outburst. So what does that mean? It means that they are neglecting their kid, infant, baby, whatever it is, until their child is basically screaming to get their needs met, and then the caregiver finally gives in. That's not healthy parenting. I think a lot of people know that. And what does that tell the child? This is the only way to get your needs met. If you sit there, you're not going to get your needs met. If you're quiet, if you're waiting, if you're patient, not going to get your needs met. Only when you tantrum, which is what we call it with a child. Only when you have some sort of emotional outburst. That's what we more say when it's an adult. Only then will you get your needs met. And so, first of all, that's very unhealthy. And it also teaches individuals who are anxiously preoccupied as an adult. I have to keep telling my partner to do this. I have to keep checking. I have to keep making sure, because if I don't have some sort of emotion, if I don't keep saying it, if I don't speak up, I'm not going to get my needs met. And if I don't see my needs are getting met, I'm going to walk away, or I'm going to have to manipulate the situation so I can get my needs met, because I know if there's no action, my needs are not getting met, because that's the way your caregiver was. I don't know what your caregiver was doing. Maybe they're watching TV, but you were sitting there hungry, right? And so you believe that that's how the world works. Now, that's not how the world works, which is wonderful, but there are people like that, which is unfortunate. And your caregiver, if you're an anxious attachment, probably was like that. So what's another aspect of this childhood? Because not every childhood is the same. What else could create anxious attachment? And this is part of it. And most people have all of it, but it really depends. What about parents who don't value your opinions? That can create anxious attachment. Let's talk about why. If your opinions are not valued, you don't think you're valuable, you don't think what you have to say matters, so then you have to have some sort of, you have this anxiety that you really want to prove what you're saying. You don't feel like you're listened to. You don't feel like you're ever going to be cared for. And so you have this pushing desire, which is the anxiety, to continue to exert your feelings and your needs on top of something, which is why a lot of people think anxious attachment styles are needy, because they keep pushing their needs and their opinions onto someone because they feel like automatically they're not valued, which is sad, right? It's very sad because their parents, their caregivers did not value their opinion regardless. No matter how old a child is, you have to listen to what they're saying. How are you going to take care of them, right? And so that's something that a lot of individuals don't realize is where some of this comes from. They feel like they're not heard. They feel like they're not valuable. They feel like people don't care. And if people don't care, they're going to be abandoned. Because what happened when they were young? Or what's another thing that happens? Their parent just leaves them there until the child tantrums. So what happened if they never tantrumed? Would they just not get their needs? Maybe. Sadly, some people are like that. Some parents are like that. That's scary, but it's true. And so they have no choice. They have to fight for their needs. They have to fight for it. They have to claw for it. Because they seriously have experience where they might not get it. All right? The other thing is parents who withdraw and pull away. This one is, all of them are so unfortunate. It could be parents who are not around. It could also mean a parent went to jail. It could mean that a parent walked out and never returned. The child remembers the feeling of being abandoned. And it hurts so much, right? You don't ever want to feel like that again. You don't want to feel that way, so you'll do anything not to feel that way. It doesn't matter if you're with somebody who's disrespecting you, not when you're in this mindset. Because disrespect is not a core need, but love is. Because if your caregiver is not there and they abandon you and they don't love you, typically that means they're not going to feed you, they're not going to bathe you, and then your actual needs are at the lowest end of the hierarchy, right? Are now gone. So it kind of trickles down. And so you have that experience. Not everybody does, but you do. You know what it's going to come. You know what it feels like. You know what it's going to end up as. Abandonment means somehow you're not going to get some of your needs met. Some way, shape, or form. And abandonment is so scary because children are not meant to be abandoned, obviously, but they're not meant to be alone. They're meant to have caregivers. Actually, long ago, not in our current society, but prior societies, children were actually raised by villages, right? So everybody was raising one child. Typically, I think mothers and grandmothers, matriarch, things of that nature, but it's not always the case. But it would be that, one set of individuals would be going out and hunting, getting food for the entire tribe, and then the children would be raised by the ones who are staying home. So children are not supposed to be fending for themselves. That's not how they were. That's not how it's supposed to be, biologically, psychologically. So if they're being abandoned, they're not. That's a very frightening experience. That's not how it should be. And so as an individual who develops anxious attachment, right? If you guys felt even the slightest touch of abandonment in your relationship, you spiral all the way down subconsciously to some of those earlier memories, right? Another one is typically, not all the time, but I see this, parents or caregivers who compare their partner to other people where the partner is not good enough, which is why a lot of individuals with anxious, preoccupied attachment style, they tend to struggle with self-esteem. And their parents, like we said, don't value their opinion. So the anxious preoccupied doesn't feel like they're ever going to be valuable, never going to be loved. They're always going to be abandoned. They only get something if they have to claw and fight for it. Remember the tantrum that we mentioned when children have tantrums, right? And tantruming is not, I know people take it as a negative word, but psychologically it's not a negative word. So I'm not saying this to insult anybody. It's what we describe when children behave a certain way. And you feel like that's what you have to do. So by feeling that way, what you do is you do that in your relationships if you feel like those triggers are being pulled, which not all the time are they. Unfortunately, if your partner is dismissively avoidant, they're hitting a lot of these triggers, aren't they? Dismissive avoidants don't value other people's opinions very much. Because they're too afraid to. They like to value their own, because if they value somebody else's and they're not good enough. So they triggered that one. Dismissive avoidants only give in when you tantrum. Now we'll call it an emotional outburst because you're an adult. Not all the time, but sometimes the only way they're going to answer your message, not all the time, but sometimes they do that, where like they'll leave you on red and they'll forget until you send another one. Not all the time, but they definitely pull away. And so your mind is thinking, okay, I have to go back to when I was a child and I had to tantrum. I'm going to go ahead and do that so I can finally get my needs met. And then when they don't answer your tantrum, not you as a child, as an adult, now the emotional outburst, you're thinking, what's going on? This is my only method to get my needs met. Now what do I do? This is all I know. This is all I had to do to get my needs met. There was no option for me. Why is this not working? Right? The next one is comparison about you to others. Avoidants do that sometimes. They have like a phantom X sometimes. They compare you to others, or, which is way more common, they don't compliment you. And so you're trying to think, do you not like me? Do you like somebody else? Because how come you're not saying I'm valuable enough? Because I know that my parents, subconsciously, that's what they know, used to compare me. So maybe you don't like me, you like somebody else. That can happen. And the last one is parents who pull away and withdraw, or they go to jail for a long period of time. So when an avoidant detaches, you think, okay, that's just great. I'm going to be abandoned. Let me go back to what I remember as a childhood. I had to do the tantrum because that's my only option, because otherwise I'm going to be abandoned. Or that's all I know and I still might be abandoned. And that's so scary because that was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. And children feel emotions more strongly because they can't process them properly. So it was very terrifying, right? It was horrible. You don't ever want to feel that way again. But you got to remember, individuals who are avoidant, they have a whole different system. A whole different system. When they're pulling away, they don't associate that with abandonment. It sounds bad, and I'm not trying to make an excuse, but I'm being honest with you. Sometimes they associate it with love, because when they had to detach is when their parents gave them love, right? So just like you guys had to have an emotional outburst for them to give love, your caregiver, they had to detach and be quiet, and then their parents would praise them. Oh, what a good girl, what a good boy, look how independent you are, and then they give the needs. So it's completely different. And so that's why these attachment styles clash a lot. I hope that makes sense. I really hope it does. Go ahead, subscribe, like, and I will see you in the next one.